We are back for another episode of the Patrick Coffin Show. For those of you who have never heard the show before, this is the place where we go upstream, away from arguments about politics and the law to the sources of culture. And we have a laugh as we go, as prudence dictates. The Patrick Coffin Show is dedicated to restoring some roots, the classical biblical roots of America and the West, especially the influence of the Christian faith on the culture, which once was and is now no longer, pretty much. Today's episode deals with something that everybody knows, but really doesn't know. For instance, everybody knows that Pope Pius XII was more or less Hitler's BFF, who did next to nothing to help Jews and gypsies and other victims of the Nazi terror during World War II. I mean, books have been written about this. It's on the internet. Hello? Except that almost none of it's true. Today's guest has put his formidable and formal legal mind to the service of rehabilitating the memory and legacy of Venerable Pope Pius XII, who reigned from 1939 to when he died in 1958. His name is Professor Ron Rychlak. He's the author or co-author of 8 books, including Hitler, the War, and the Pope, references to which will be found in the show notes of the show. In 2007, he was an honoree at the U.S. Holocaust Museum for his work on interfaith dialogue, and he's an advisor to the Holy See's delegation to the United Nations. Professor Ron Rychlak, great to talk to you again, sir, as always.
Thanks, Patrick. It's great to be here.
I guess you're also a favorite among students, the Ben Hardy Faculty Excellence Award. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. It was a nice honor from the class that graduated in the spring.
Nice to have happy customers.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Or often unhappy customers are usually the ones motivated to write, nasty grams. So that's good to be honored. And I'm obviously, as a Catholic, I'm interested in having people be able to tell the truth in a simple way when our holy faith is attacked, and also when holy leaders are attacked. I wanted to ask you, I don't think I've ever asked you this before, Ron, that is, how did you become involved in the story of Pius XII? Did you grow up hearing the classic stories that he was Hitler's Pope and so on, or did you come to that when books began to be written? How did you become interested in the late Holy Father's life?
I got to tell you, Patrick, it's my formal Catholic education ended about 5th grade.
Okay.
My family moved out to the country. I had gone to Catholic school for 1st and 2nd grade. I went to weekly school in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, but I didn't even know the story of Pope Pius XII. And I was teaching in the law school. This is over 20 years ago now. And a colleague of mine, a very dear friend who just recently passed away, said, the Pope was a Nazi. I said, what are you talking about? And I went to the public library. I thought he was talking about the current Pope, John Paul II. And I came back the next day. Yeah, I said, no, look, he was in a Nazi labor camp. He said, no, I mean the guy who was Pope back then. And that started it. The first book I picked off the shelf at the public library said he provided ambiguous leadership, and soon I'm at the university library, and there's a book praising him as the only person opposing the Nazis, standing up against Hitler in all of Europe, and there's another book that's highly critical of him. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to find out what happened. It was a fascinating story, fascinating issue, and it's been over 20 years of my life now, researching, talking, and still debating and still uncovering new and interesting facts about Pope Pius XII.
Probably, it would have been late 90s. I gave a talk at Pierce College in Los Angeles, and it was sponsored by a group called the LA Jewish Family Services. A very friendly group, and they invited me in to talk about the world religion known as Catholicism. Someone kind of pushed me into it because they had 13 talks, and there was 2 different ones on Mormonism, 2 different ones on Buddhism, and they had no Catholics. So they scraped the bottom of the barrel and they found me. So I went and I gave the talk, basically Catholicism 101, and they invited me back to talk about something controversial. And I said, well, what about the role of the church in World War II? And the room temperature changed. It was like an ionospheric change. And they said, you mean Hitler's Pope? I said, you're talking about Pius XII? Yeah. Almost everyone I talked to in that room, Ron, most of them were Jewish, but some of them weren't. It's just it was the default story they heard at the family table that the Pope did nothing, and that got me interested in this counter story of the Pope's role, and because I've interviewed Rabbi Eric Silver. And he tells the same basic story. It was that narrative that Pius XII was Hitler's Pope is not even challenged, just kind of assumed. So I ended up doing the talk on contraception, which became the basis for my book, Sex au Naturel. But that's the reaction when I brought up the Holy Father during World War II took me aback.
Well, and it often does. And the funny thing, the ironic thing, the point of particular interest is that during the war, after the war, throughout his life, until the time he died, he was considered a hero. There are editorials written about how he's the only voice crying out of the silence of a continent. At the time of the liberation of Rome, the Jewish community put up a big tablet in tribute to everything he had done. At the time of his death, Jewish groups from around the world sent tributes and thanks and expressed regret at his passing for all he had done. Golda Meir said, in our darkest moments, he's the one person who spoke out for us, who protected us. And the people who were around him, that's clearly the story you got up until something happened in the 1960s that changed the ballgame.
We're going to get to that in a second, because that is the watershed, 1963, the year that I came into this fallen world, and the power of the media to control the governing story about how we're supposed to officially see these things. Was Pius XII ever officially named a righteous Gentile?
No, it was proposed. There was it's actually been written that he was, but he never was. I think the proposal came out, and some people eagerly wrote that he actually was, but that did not officially happen.
Mm-hmm. I understand that in addition to the Jews and other displaced persons during the war, that he personally let Jewish women who were with child have their babies in his chambers.
Well, at Castel Gandolfo is a little village outside of Rome that became a haven, a refuge for, yes, there were Jews, but there were also AWOL German soldiers that sought refuge. There were Allied soldiers down behind enemy lines. But yes, and there were gypsies. Anybody who, particularly after the point in time when the Nazis occupied Rome, anyone who might be subject to persecution was welcomed and brought into the Vatican itself, to Castel Gandolfo, to any church properties throughout Rome. And the papal bedroom at Castel Gandolfo became a birthing and nursing station where about 40 children, primarily, if not exclusively Jewish, were born in the papal bedroom. That's right. And if you ever see pictures, by the way, just stop for a moment, you ever see pictures of Castel Gandolfo at this time, there are people sleeping in every cranny, up and down staircases, hallways, anywhere, because as an American intelligence report written back to Washington said, the place was crammed with refugees.
The phrase, when Rome was occupied, sounds like something from 500 years ago, could never happen. We're talking about many people are still alive when Rome was occupied by Nazi forces.
That's right. Well, yeah, it was in 1943. Mussolini was toppled, and even though at that point in time Italy was still an ally of Germany, Hitler became concerned that they were going to flip. So he sent troops into Italy, and they occupied Rome. They respected the neutrality of the Vatican with a white line painted on the ground. So some fascinating stories.
So Pius XII was a Germanophile. He was fluent in German. He loved German literature, culture, music. And under his predecessor, Pius XI, he played a role in the Concordat with Germany, correct? Just to take us, press rewind a little bit before he became Pope.
I need to go step by step through that. So in World War I, in 1917, the young Eugenio Pacelli, who would go on to become Pope Pius XII, was sent to Germany to try to present the papal peace plan to bring about an end to World War I. He made that presentation. It didn't end it, although the war ended shortly, a year or two later on very similar type of terms. But he stayed in Germany as the papal representative, where he saw the German soldiers return back to Bavaria, feeling that they had been betrayed by their government, and now they're dealing with the reparations, the loss of colonies, no jobs. That's that festering difficulty that led to the rise of the Nazis. And Pachelli, as early as 1921, is quoted in a newspaper talking about the rise of this dangerous element. In 1923, he named Hitler in a report back to Rome, saying there's this guy Hitler who's coming, and he's got some followers, and he's dangerous.
In 23?
23.
Didn't Mein Kampf come out that year?
Mein Kampf came out, I think, after that, actually. I think
so he's way, I mean, he's sort of the canary in the coal mine. No one saw this coming.
Well, he was, and of course that was he was the papal representative. He's dealing with, by the way, all kinds of poverty issues, handing out food and shelter and trying to take care of people.
Mm-hmm.
But and in that report back to Rome, he said these followers of Hitler are persecuting Jews and Catholics. And he pointed to some Catholic bishops who were doing a good example, setting a good example by standing up for the Jews. So the idea that he was enamored with Hitler or with Germany. In fact, one of my favorite lines later on in life, there was someone made a comment about the French, and he said something like, "I've spent enough time with the German that I really appreciate the company of the French." So the story that he is overly enamored with Germany is put out really by his critics to try to suggest something sinister to that.
You see this on the cover of some of the deeply dishonest books, like Daniel Goldhagen's book and John Cornwell's. I think it's Hitler's Pope has a photo of then Pachelli strolling in front of some German soldiers, and it's like, oh my gosh, he just had a beer with Hitler. What's the real context of that photo?
Okay. So the book is called Hitler's Pope. And the cover shows him what appears to be walking by. There's that distinctive helmet that every American associates with Nazis, right? Only, and in fact, in the inside cover on the British edition, this was dated to March of 1937, the month that Hitler became chancellor in Germany. Only the truth was the photograph was taken in 1927. It was Nuncio Pachelli attending Hindenburg's birthday party. Mm-hmm. Those are Weimar soldiers there. When I do my talks, I go through a series of slides and show how the photograph's been edited so that even a chauffeur who's standing there begins to look like an SS officer. You darken it and you blur it so you can't tell. It's just a chauffeur holding a car door open.
Right.
But they make it look like he's surrounded by Nazis.
You could easily make it one little tweak on Photoshop, and it's Darth Vader, right? You could do a whole sketch there. So after the war, you've got Golda Meir praising his name and his memory. You have the New York Times and other world stage publications honoring this guy for heroically saving. Is there an official estimate of the number of Jews who would be dead but for Pius XII's efforts?
Yeah, I think the one, and it's subject to criticism because you don't know, but there was an estimate done by an Israeli diplomat after the war who spent about 6 months in the archives of Yad Vashem, and he ultimately came to the number of about 850,000 Jews that were saved by Pope Pius XII and the Catholic Church.
Was that Pinchas Lapid?
That was indeed.
Okay. Who is Rabbi Zoli, and what happened to him in Rome?
Rabbi Zoli, Israel Zoli at first, he changed his name later, but Israel Zoli, chief rabbi of Rome, is in charge of Rome when the Germans occupy in 1943. When the Germans came in, they did a little sneaky thing. They said, "Hey, Jewish community, give us all your gold, give us enough gold, and we won't round you up and send you off." And of course, it was a trick, just a way to get all the gold before we round them up and set everybody off. But when that offer is first made, Zoli goes into the Vatican and meets with some papal representatives and says, we need to borrow some gold. And the answer that comes back from the Pope is, as much as you need for as long as you need it. Zoli takes that back to the community. The community actually, I think by best accounts now that people believe, the community probably raised the gold on its own, didn't actually take the loan. It was offered. When the roundups took place shortly thereafter, there were all kinds of papal interventions and trying to stop that from happening, and some people did get released. Zoli ultimately sought refuge inside the Vatican. So he, along with tens of thousands of at least, let me say thousands of people, thousands of Jewish people sought refuge in Catholic buildings throughout Rome. After the war, he had a conversion. He had a vision of Jesus, and he became Catholic. It was not in tribute to Pope Pius XII that he became Catholic. It was because of an honest conversion. It was in tribute to Pope Pius XII that he adopted Eugenio as his Christian name, and he had the Pope serve as his sponsor or his godfather. So,
wow.
Yeah, the chief rabbi of Rome, who saw everything. And by the way, again, the Roman community the Jewish community in Rome put up a plaque of thanks and tribute for everything Pope Pius XII had done to save them during the war. So that was the viewpoint that existed throughout the war, and at the time of liberation, all kinds of tributes to the Pope.
And the Pope reigned until his death in 1958. The funeral of which, by the way, very quick sidebar, Pius XII's funeral was the only time of respite from Mother Teresa's dark night of the soul. Since 1947 until she died in 96, that terrible, sense of being brutally alienated from God and no emotional affect whatsoever. She did have an encounter with Christ at his funeral. So I believe it was 5 days during 1958, during his funeral. I thought that was very interesting. Apparently those two know each other rather well. I love those story behind the stories. I like those Paul Harvey-like details.
No, absolutely. And they did know each other well. And she spoke, that's the thing. All the world leaders at the time, Catholic and non-Catholic, spoke so highly of Pope Pius XII. After the war, President Roosevelt, as the war is winding down, after liberation of Rome, President Roosevelt sends a letter to Pius thanking him for his collaboration in protecting the persecuted minorities, racial and religious minorities, which everybody knows they're talking about the Jewish people. And again, all of the Jewish groups said the same thing.
True or false, Pius XII was technically a spy for the Allies?
I think the latest findings he definitely was. He definitely was a conduit for information, whether he uncovered the actual information. But during the early phases of the war, when there was the Germans were considering their invasion of the lowlands, making their way ultimately to France, the Pope received messages from folks inside of Germany saying, here's where we're coming, here's when we're coming, and he passed that on to the British. The British didn't know whether to believe it or not. Not that they doubted the Pope, but, who gave this stuff to the Pope?
Sure.
Sure enough, it happened. Sure enough, it absolutely happened. So he actually was involved in that. Later on, as a new book recently, The Church of Spies points out, he became pretty actively involved in the plots to overthrow and even assassinate Hitler.
Movie waiting to happen, if done right. I understand someone has bought the rights to that book, Church of Spies. Very interesting. We're going to take a very quick break. I want to invite you to a special experience in a certain boot-shaped Catholic country in Europe, but I don't want to say anything else. We'll be right back. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. After these few words, we'll turn the corner and go to 1963 and the turning of the tide of public opinion against Pius XII in favor of a whole battery of lies. We'll be right back. Don't go away. Just want to take a moment and personally invite you to Rome next year, April 3rd through 12th. We're going to have a pilgrimage of a lifetime. We'll be in Assisi, Siena, Orvieto. We're going to drink wine and taste Tuscan food. We're going to visit all the holy sites. We're going to grow in our friendship with Christ and with each other. Our spiritual director is the dynamic and very orthodox Father David Genuine from the Diocese of Santa Rosa. Great guy. You'll love him. We're going to celebrate at least one extraordinary form. So if you've never experienced the Latin Mass, this is the time to do it. We're going to be, most of the time, after Assisi, Siena, and Orvieto, we'll be in Rome for our visits to the four major basilicas. We'll go to the San Sebastian Catacombs. We will go to the famous Capuchin Bone Church, which was a complete trip. And we will be in Rome for the Wednesday general audience of Pope Francis, if he's in Rome, of course. And Divine Mercy Sunday. Guess where we're going to have Mass? St. Peter's Church, 12 o'clock noon, Divine Mercy Sunday. Doesn't get more rich in mercy and in love than that for Catholics to be in Rome in the Eternal City for Divine Mercy Sunday. So join up. Before November 3rd, you can save $100. Go to patrickcoffin.media/Italy. That's patrickcoffin.media/Italy. We're going to limit it to one bus, so this is going to fill up. I don't want you to pay the procrastination tax. So if you're going, sign up before November 3rd and save per person. It's going to be a trip of a lifetime. I've been there 6 or 7 times. I honeymooned in Italy, and it is an extraordinarily, exquisitely beautiful place, and the churches there are just drop-dead gorgeous and amazing. But this is not a tour. It's a pilgrimage, so it'll be a time of prayer and growth in faith, and I hope you join us. Again, patrickcoffin.media/Italy. Thanks much, and we'll see you there. Back with Professor Ronald Rychlak talking about rehabilitating the legacy and heroism of Pius XII. Let's go 5 years after he died and talk about Rolf Hochhuth's play, sometimes translated The Deputy, which came out in 1963. I guess as of this recording, Ron, he's still alive, still apparently cranking out mediocre products.
Well, I don't know if he's still cranking them out, but he's still alive. He most recently, and then this is by many years ago, several years ago, was in the news, arrested hanging out with his best lifelong buddy, David Irving.
David Irving. Now, I remember the headline guy all the time because he got in trouble up in my native Canada for being a Holocaust denier. What's the Cliff's Notes summary of David Irving?
David Irving is probably the world's foremost Holocaust denier. He actually was involved in a very famous lawsuit suing someone for alleging that he was a Holocaust denier and losing because the court concluded that in fact he was. And he has been a provocateur, making outrageous statements. I mean, really not a nice person. I actually had a debate with him on the phone once, although we didn't speak in the same half hour. He spoke for a half hour, then I spoke for half an hour. But he and Rolf Hochhuth are best buddies. Mm-hmm. And Hochhuth is portrayed as this man of the left, enlightened, and David Irving, of course, is a troglodyte, who and so people tried to question how could they possibly be together, although they worked together in the 1960s. When some criticism came out about Hochhuth, Irving has always defended him. When my co-author Jan Mahai Pachepa came out with a claim that the deputy, in fact, was put together inside the Kremlin, the first one to defend him was David Irving, and he said, that's nonsense. I worked with him. I knew him at the time. We were best friends, and it wasn't the case. Of course, that's inconsistent with stuff David Irving has said.
I was going to say, that's also not true. I think it's well established that Hochhuth was, in fact, an actual commie and produced this play as a kind of agitprop propaganda for the Soviet Union.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not even sure he was much more than a front. Mm-hmm. Certainly the play was done that way, and certainly he was working on a play about the Pope. But I think the play might have been written by a committee. That's why it came out as 8 hours long. That's why.
Sorry, Ron, I thought you said the play was 8 hours long.
It was 8 hours long if you did it as it was written. Now, they got a well-known communist producer, Erwin Piscator, and he cut the play down to about 2 hours to produce it in a new theater that had been established in West Berlin to present communist propaganda plays mm-hmm. to the Democratic side. It was promoted and translated in virtually every communist outlet you can find. It was produced in every communist nation, and high school kids were made to go to it every year to see it. Mm-hmm. This is just wrapped in so much communist propaganda. And so here's the thing. Pius XII is a good guy hero, good guy hero, good guy hero until the 1960s when this play comes out. This play, which is, in fact, in the 1960s, British intelligence came forward with a report that I reprint in the second edition of Hitler, the War, and the Pope. where they said, it looks to us like David Irving and Rolf Hochhuth are involved in some sort of Soviet disinformation campaign designed to bring discredit to Western entities, Western religion. And that's exactly right.
I was going to say, shocking. We didn't see that coming.
Yeah, I know.
Surprising.
So it's a fascinating story to see how all these pieces fit together.
In short form, for people who don't have the 8 hours to see the original, or 2 for the one that made it into the stage mainstream, the deputy depicts the Pope as basically Hitler's lackey, right? Incompetent, disinterested, happy to do the will of his puppet master.
Disinterested. It's not so much puppet master, but it's disinterested, willing to look beyond all of the horrors that are happening at his feet because he's worried about money and controlling the central papacy type of stuff. So he's not really working for Hitler. He's allowing Hitler to do all this stuff, and he's not objecting.
The Costa Gravis film, I think it's called Amen, came out about maybe 15 years ago. Is that based on the deputy, or is that one of the sources of the screenplay?
Yeah, that absolutely is based on the play. And the basic theme of the play is a good Nazi tries to get a message to the Pope. A good priest helps him, but bad people stop him. When they finally get there, the Pope doesn't care. Right. It's kind of
He's like a Canadian. You say, tell a Canadian he's apathetic. Who cares? There are other films that came out before '63. I want to say that The Scarlet and the Black is one of those, starring Gregory Peck. There's a movement to buy the rights and reissue that story. Obviously, it's about an Irish priest, but it certainly gives a different backdrop, a different premise about the role of the Catholic Church in fighting Hitler.
That's right. Well, it's a Gregory Peck film, which I think it's the '70s, so I think that came out after the play, but before the movie, Amen, that came out, which is really a really fun, really interesting movie to watch. I do think it downplays the role of Pope Pius XII, because the goal there wasn't to try to persuade anybody about Pius XII. It was to depict Monsignor Hugh O'Flannery from Ireland, who protected so many Jews, downed airmen, AWOL, German soldiers, anybody, again, who needed help.
Sure.
That the church didn't ask for ID. If you needed help, you showed up, you got help.
You mentioned AWOL, German soldiers. That's a very interesting sidebar to World War II. You don't hear about this, but this is almost the premise of a book that I would love to see. In fact, I've tried to get the rights, and someone else says I'm locked up. It's the Gary Goldman book, The Shadow of His Wings. Have you heard of this?
I don't think I know that one.
The Shadow of His Wings is about a German soldier who wants to be a Franciscan priest. And he studies with the OFMs. And back then they have, I think, a 9-year formation time. And meanwhile, he's getting promoted inside the German army. But he hates Hitler. He hates the Third Reich. And he eventually, as he's studying for the priesthood, is recruited into the SS, which he does do. And he never fires his Luger. It's the most amazing story, and it through the direct intervention of Pius XII, he's ordained clandestinely, like 5 years before the appointed time, so that he can minister as a Catholic priest to German soldiers while wearing the SS uniform. And it's too strange not to be true. It's called The Shadow of His Wings. In fact, I'm going to put that in the show notes. It's a true page turner.
Wow. Yeah, no, well, okay, I got a new book I got to get.
Yeah, sure.
That is fascinating.
You're welcome.
There's so many fascinating stories that come out of this era of priests who are put in these horrible concentration camps, and because they all speak Latin, they can communicate across boundaries that otherwise they wouldn't be able to.
Right. Another benefit of Latin as a universal language. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And it's there. I spoke to a priest who's an elderly man. This is probably 15 years, maybe more ago. I called him up. He had been in Rome in seminary when the German occupation came about, and he was talking about how they were on war rations and they had so little food, and then there were 100 Jewish people brought to their seminary and they were told they had to take him in. They were told by the Vatican, you got to take him in, and you got to share your food. And you could hear this guy, the pain in this guy's voice, talking about all these years earlier about how hard it was. But he knew he had to do it, and they did it. But they had so little, and I love the stories of the Jewish groups that are being sheltered, and there's a knocking on the door, and they switch from a Jewish prayer to singing the Ave Maria because the Nazis come in, they got to pass themselves off.
Right. Then what's wrong with giving homage to the ultimate Jewish mother? It all kind of fits.
There you go. Right.
There seems to be some rehabilitation among some Jewish intellectuals once they do things like get access to the Vatican archives from the era. I'm thinking of Rabbi David Deline and Gary Krupp of the Pave the Way Foundation. I mentioned earlier Rabbi Eric Silver. Are you noticing a turning of the tide among Jewish historians and the Jewish community generally to take a second look at the role of the Holy Father during the war?
I think we're seeing it not just within the Jewish community. I think we're seeing more and more as the actual true, if we're punching through the false narratives that have been put forward. And I know all three of the guys you mentioned, I know them all very well, all very good men. And I've worked with all of them at different times. But there are other folks as well from outside the Catholic tradition. It's not only Catholics now who are saying Pope Pius XII is a good guy, but other historians who are getting into the documents, and even a few critics. You start to see occasional critics pull back some of their most significant charges.
Perhaps the true believers are not going to back off, like a Cornwell or a Goldhagen are probably not going to go, oh, hey, my gosh, my whole premise is wrong.
Yeah, if you've staked your career on something, it's awful hard to pull back from that. At one point, Cornwell almost did, though. I mean, frankly, he has come out and said, now that I know more, I see Pius XII was much more limited in the options that were open and available to him. And everybody thought, well, maybe he's stepping back. But then they released, a new printing of Hitler's Pope, and there was no change at all inside the cover.
Have you debated Mr. Cornwell?
In writing. Not in person, but we had an exchange in Brill's Content magazine, which I think I reprinted in the second edition of Hitler, the War, and the Pope, because I think I came off very well because I just had to tell the truth.
Right. Yeah. The truth's always simple, isn't it? You don't have to rehearse it. You don't have to worry about the jot and tittle because it just comes out and it's got a ring to it.
Right.
Here's speaking of backdrop sidebar stories. Is there any evidence that Pope Pius XII knew or corresponded with Dietrich Bonhoeffer?
Yes, they're at least through the same channels. It's something I discovered, and it's dropped in a footnote, I think, in Hitler, the War, and the Pope, because it was so, to me, it was so hard to be confident in it that I thought it was important, but I had to say it. But I didn't want to go out too far on a limb because I just had some documents that suggested that was the case. Well, now Mark Ribling in his book Church of Spies shows that the Pope was working very much with the Bonhoeffer conspiracy people, very much involved in giving support, helping them have the ability to go up to and recruit new members and encourage people that there was a potential life after Hitler, because, if you think about it, that was a very difficult sell for a lot of people. So Pope Pius XII was up to his elbows in conspiracy against Hitler, including the conspiracies that Bonhoeffer was involved in.
Do you know any of the people working on the canonization cause of Pius XII offhand?
Well, sure. I knew the relator. There's been a change in relators now. That's the investigation judge. I knew Father Peter Gumpel very well. I still know him very well. The new relator I've met. I don't know particularly well. I just haven't been to Rome that much since it took place. The postulator who passed away, Father Paul.
Maybe something. I want to say Pius, but that's not right.
No.
Was he Jesuit? As Father Gumpel was?
Yeah.
Okay.
Both Jesuit.
I'm going to find it. It will be in the show notes, ladies and gentlemen. Don't worry.
And I should know it, but Father Paul passed away a few years ago. But wonderful man, and I used to go to Rome fairly frequently. As I did my work, I would often, because I was wading into some deep waters, and I understood that. And these men knew more than anyone in the world, and I would show that with them and share it with them, and try to make sure I didn't make any mistakes.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think the Second Vatican Council and Pope John the 23rd's calling of the council, and with our nonstop 24-hour media cycle, we don't have that super look or that 10,000 feet above the tarmac look at the 20th century. But Pius XII, he reigned from like 1939 to 1958. Before and during and after the war, he produced, his writing is so magnificent. He wrote an encyclical in 1957, Miranda Proris, on the magnificent power of cinema. He was a polymath. He was really, he wrote on everything. I think he wrote 6 or 7 encyclicals on the Rosary alone. Very, very august, perhaps maybe in contrast with good Pope John, the chubby prelate from Venice who loved pasta and wine and so on. Do you think that the fact that the Second Vatican Council was called so soon after his death, that he's kind of been overshadowed, a little bit tragically lost in the shuffle, it seems to me?
Well, perhaps. Certainly, if you look back at the influence in Vatican II, after Scripture itself, the writings of Pope Pius XII are the most cited writings of anybody. So he had a big impact there.
In the council documents?
In the council documents.
Oh, I did not know that.
And he actually had considered convening such a council himself and figured that the cost was too much, so he shied away from doing that. But John the 23rd was a great devotee of Pius XII. Some people try to draw that line, the distinction, and use it in a negative way towards Pius XII. But John the 23rd certainly never saw it that way. He spoke well and prayed to Pius XII on a regular basis.
Do you think that he will be made a saint one day?
I do, because they've been through the study of his life, and they've concluded he lived a life of heroic virtue. The theologians have been through his life. Theologians, bishops have approved it. They are down to now looking for a verifiable miracle. And they've been there for a while, and there have been some that they thought were close. I honestly don't know where the miracle stands.
Sure.
But if it comes down to that, I think that they will get there.
Would it be Father Pierre Blett? Was that the name you were looking for? He's another historian.
Father Blay was one of the 4 Jesuit historians.
Blay, that's it. Blett. I'm from Canada. Blett. Very good, Patrick. All right. Muy bien. Yeah.
He was one of the 4 who put together the Acts and Documents of Vatican II.
Okay, well, I've just learned a ton about this. I just wanted to ask you one more question about... Go ahead.
Molinari. Father Paul Molinari.
Paul Molinari, very good. He's deceased now?
He is deceased.
Okay. Is there more to say of Pius XII? Is this a story with so many onion layers that you're going to revisit it? Or have you pretty much put a red bow on what can be said about defending the late Holy Father? Every
time I think I have a red bow on it, there's a new factoid, there's a new issue, there's a new charge that's made or new evidence. So I expect that I will be dealing with this issue for the rest of my life.
We just need to come out with a better play than The Deputy, but in light of the truth, and see how that flies. Maybe a film nowadays, I think today a film would have a bigger footprint. But it's got to be done well. It's got to be done well, as always. It's always on the execution. How can people connect with you if they want to bring you to a conference and talk about this, or set up some opportunity for you to tell the story?
Sure. I'm at the University of Mississippi. That's also known as Ole Miss. Mm-hmm. So it's very easy to find my name at the university on the webpage. It's my first name, my first initial, and then my last name, R. Rychlak, at olemiss.edu. Also will be in the show notes at patrickcoffin.media. I hope you've all enjoyed today's show. Subscribe, rate, and review. Keep in touch at patrickcoffin.media, where you'll find out more information on how to connect with Professor Ron Rychlak, author of Hitler, the War, and the Pope. Good professor. As always, a real honor. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, Patrick. It's always great.
This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there?